Hi guys, welcome to Brands Hatch. I said I'd try to do one earlier this week in the hopes that someone can find it more useful in preparation for the race this weekend for our league race. So we'll see how it goes. Um, I think the only concern I have is that because it takes me a lot of time to prepare during the week for a league race, is that trying to do it earlier like this, I just might not be as, I don't know, as helpful as it might be later in the week once I have my head wrapped, thoroughly around the track. But I've spent quite a bit of time on it the last couple of days to get to a good place, and I think I'm far enough along that this can still be useful for people. So we'll see how it goes. Wish me luck. Um, what to say about Brands Hatch? I like it a lot, but it's not an easy track by any stretch of the imagination. And I think the two things that weigh on me most heavily here at Brands Hatch are going off track and maintaining proper balance of the car. Okay, because I think those are the two biggest challenges at this track. It's um, it's one thing to figure out your lines and your braking points and and all of that sort of thing, but I think this track punishes first of all putting a wheel off. Obviously because there's just no runoff virtually anywhere. So it punishes that severely. And second, it really punishes an an inability to keep the car balanced at the right times. And I think that might be a big focus of what I talk about on this track because I think that if you consume a lot of either sim racing content um, or real world racing content, then you're going to hear drivers and coaches talk about the balance of the car a lot. Um, and I think Brands Hatch is a track where that really becomes obvious, or at least more obvious than it does at a lot of other tracks. So one of the things I'm going to do that I haven't done before is I'm probably going to spend a lot of time in the helmet cam view because it shows the the changes in the balance of the car, and lets you actually see it happening. And it's virtually, I'm not going to say it's impossible to drive in, but it's really hard to drive in because it really throws you off because you're actually disconnected from the car when you're doing it in a sim. So those forces can really screw you up. But I think for learning purposes and for what I want to do today, I think it can be pretty useful. We'll find out. Um, so yeah, let's get started. Turn one is a hard corner. There's no two ways about it. It it combines pretty much all of the worst elements of what makes Brands Hatch difficult into one high-speed corner. Okay, and what are those elements? One, no runoff, right? So if you put a wheel in the wrong place, either on the outside here or on the apex, then you can easily be gone. Two, it's blind. You can't see the apex right now as you're coming into the braking zone. You don't pick it up until very late, which makes that very difficult to consistently get the apex right. Three, elevation change. And not just elevation change, but elevation change at a really difficult point right when the weight of the car is transitioning. So, you combine all of those elements and add to it that it's a high speed corner. So, small mistakes are harder to recover from. But you combine all those things together and it's just a really hard corner. So let's um, So let's talk about it this way first. As I'm approaching turn one, and I want to pull up the track map for Brands Hatch first. Because I forget corner names. Okay, so coming up to turn one, also known as paddock. My braking point is actually on the right hand side. And if you look at the wall out there in front of us, you will see an oblong, somewhat oval shaped blue logo there. That is actually what I use as my braking reference. And I do it for one primary reason, and that is that as I'm approaching the corner and my eyes want to drift over to the right, which is where the apex is located, that is much easier to pick up consistently and doesn't have me shifting my eyes from the left, which is where the actual brake markers are, and back over to the right. So I find that to be a very comfortable braking marker. And generally speaking, what I'm looking to do, not generally speaking, all of the time, what I'm looking to do is to get on the brakes just as that blue logo is passing out of my peripheral vision. Um, so as it goes past me, that's when I go into the brakes. Now, one of the things that you're going to have to make a judgment call on, and this will depend on your comfort level and skill at the track, is how much you flirt with the edge of the track itself and risk putting a wheel off versus um, getting a lap time, right? So you can see on the approach how close I'm getting over to the edge of the track. That's absolutely intentional. One of the things that I spend a lot of time working on this week in order to prepare is getting myself as close to the edge of the track as I can. And in my practice, if that means putting wheels off from time to time, I'm perfectly fine with that because I can always draw back on my aggressiveness a little bit. But what you can't do in the middle of the race is start pushing it and expect yourself to be comfortable out there at those margins unless you've worked on it significantly in advance. So I can always draw back. I cannot push during the race itself and expect to have positive results. So this is one of the things that I work on a lot in my lead up to the race is getting the car out there as far as I can on every corner. On the run up, you see how early I am that I'm getting out to the edge of that track. That's because as you come up to the approach here, the track itself starts to curve inwards to the right, right, in order to get to the apex, which means you cannot stay out there at the very edge of the track because if you do and you try to straight line brake, you're going to run out of track and you're going to go straight off the edge and into the 505 sign up there. So you're going to have to peel inwards as you get into the braking zone. I think that where a lot of people who are newer or less comfortable with this track, the mistake they make is they will have the car positioned out in the middle of the track. And that is going to cost you lap times every single time. Because you are narrowing the corner, you're going to force yourself into a severe turning angle and upset the balance of the car much more easily. Okay, so when I get on the brakes here, see how that, I guess, that wide approach, and let's go to the in-car helmet cam again. If you get out there early, it makes it easier to stay out there and not dive in so close to the apex too early. That's going to allow you to open up the corner, which is always the goal, right? You'll see I just start a gentle turn to follow the edge of the road as it begins to turn inward. It's not so much that I'm turning into the corner yet, so much as I'm just following the edge of the road as it works its way into me. And then when I get on the brake, that I now have room to essentially straight line brake during the heaviest part of the zone, and then do my turning from a wide angle once I get slowed down enough. If you're too far into the inside, that turning angle is going to be much more severe at a very bad time. Okay, so onto the brakes. Now I'm coming off of the brakes and starting my turn in. Now here's the thing, and this is why a narrower line can really give you so much trouble. I think one of the things you'll have a tendency to do when you take a narrower line is you will have a tendency to brake later because you are trying to go faster, right? One of the things that does is at this point when you start going downhill, the back end is unloading, right? And if you are starting your turn while that back end is unloading and making it worse by still being on the brakes at this point or very soon after, you're exaggerating the pitch of the car towards the front, unloading the back end even more as you both go downhill and make a sharp turn to the right. So when you see people spinning out on this corner, which happens, often, to me, that's one of the biggest reasons that happens, because they're not controlling the balance of the car properly as they get to this point in the track. Okay? If you go up here a little bit so that we can work backwards. I catch this apex a little bit too heavy, but it's okay. So right here, when I'm catching the apex, this is when I want to be going back to full throttle, as close to here as humanly possible, right? If you take a too tight of a line, too tight of an entry with much more of a severe turning angle in through this corner, it is the car is going to become unbalanced. You are going to suffer most likely from significant over or understeer, and you are going to have to delay the application of the throttle until, like all the way down here somewhere, right? If that's the case, you're losing an enormous amount of time to someone who has got this corner nailed down much better. So check your entry, right? Check the overhead view. And see where your car is positioned. If you're never all the way out to the left-hand side, I think that's something that you have to look at, because you can see that at this point I'm just now getting closer to the middle of the track, right? But I'm already completely off the brakes at this point. The entry that I'm making is much later from a width standpoint than I think a lot of people do. You don't want to be anywhere near that curb until you're right over the crest of the hill. If you get in there too far, you're going to have to ride that curb forever, and that's not what you want to do. Okay. The other thing that I want you to watch, and because when I talk about balance on the car, this corner is a great example of it, and there are many of them on this track. What I'm trying to achieve in every corner, really, but I think even more so at this track than a lot of others, because of the elevation changes, the bumpiness, you name it, is I'm trying to maintain the best balance of the car that I can. What does that mean? GT3 cars are extremely pitch sensitive. They're also very sensitive to lateral pitch, lateral motion as well, right? Because they're very heavy cars. So that means when you go on the brakes, it's going to dive down onto the nose, right? When you come off the accelerator, the front end's going to come up. When you turn left, all the weight's going to shift over to the left-hand side. And when you turn right, or when you turn left, the weight shifts over to the right side. When you turn right, it shifts over to the left side. That is always going to happen. But what you do can affect when that weight shift occurs and how severely it occurs, right? What I'm trying to accomplish is to smooth all of that weight shifting out. I don't want it to happen in big chunks, where all of the weight is flying over to one wheel or two wheels and overwhelming the amount of grip that those two tires have, right? So the idea is to shift that weight much more gradually. This corner, if you watch, based on the line that I take, the way that I brake, and the way that I steer, I will start generating that weight shift much earlier than someone who comes down the inside of the track and takes a sharper angle. The weight shift happens much more gradually. So there you see it dive down onto it, right? As I start turning, the weight begins to shift over to the left-hand side. As I come off of the brakes, I'm coming off of the brakes before the major steering happens, so that in this case it's much more balanced from front to back, and all of the pressure can safely go over to the left two tires, and I'm not just centering it on one tire. Okay, and then once it gets straightened up enough and it starts to balance itself back out, then you can go back to full throttle. Turn 2 is probably the I would say the most traditional corner on the track. It's just generally speaking a very straightforward hairpin, which means that you're going to treat it with a very hard braking zone. You're going to be heavy on the brakes. You're going to trail brake a lot, and it's really just a question of getting the car turned around with a smooth throttle application, so that you're not spinning the wheels too much coming out of it, right? My brake marker is the orange marker on the left-hand side. I've used the Brands Hatch sign above in the past, but I don't find it consistent enough, So it's just not definite, I guess is the word that I would use. I find more consistency by using the marker on the left-hand side. But pretty straightforward. That's my brake marker. It's a heavy braking zone, so hard on the brakes at this point. Straight line brake virtually all the way through until you really get up to the corner. Then as you start the significant turn, you slowly trail brake and release the brakes right up into the apex. And I'll point one thing out that I want you to disregard that I did wrong on this. Notice that that for some reason I kept my foot hovered over the brake pedal on this for much longer than I normally would. So it's showing as a continuation of trail brake all the way through the exit. That is incorrect. Don't do that, but I'll show you what that looks like. See, I'm already straightening up and coming back on the throttle, and I still am showing brake pressure at this point, and will continue to. I mean, it was a really good lap, so it didn't have too much of an effect on it, but that is a mistake. For some reason, I don't come off of the brake until I'm still there. Jesus Christ, look at that. Just hovering my foot, That's one of those stupid little things that you'll do from time to time. I'll show you what that, back up to my lap before that, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done properly. Continuously holding the brake pedal is not something that I typically have a problem with, so I don't know why it cropped up right there, but You can see that on this one where I do it properly, right up to the apex, I hold it, then I completely release it as I really start getting around the corner and coming back onto the throttle. You know, that's a much better example of proper trail braking. Okay. The The biggest mistake I think that people make here are one of two things. Either they push the braking zone too far and try to brake later than they actually can. You see, I'm just pushing to get that extra tenth or something. So you try braking a meter or two later, and next thing you know, you've blown the apex entirely, and you're struggling to get the car turned around and losing a half a second. So that's probably the big thing that I see. I think a little bit less common is where someone just dives into the apex too early, um, and as a result, they can't carry as much speed through the corner. They have to overslow the car. So when you're approaching this, try to keep it out wide, and make that turn in a little bit later so that you can carry more speed. It's a tight corner, so you're going to have to slow the car significantly. Just try not to put yourself in a position where you have to overslow the car and lose time as a result. Watch your throttle application when you're coming off of this corner. The back end can get very slippery. I think you've started to turn around and go downhill again at this point, so you've got a little bit more weight on the nose, lightening the back end, and I think it's easier to get the back tires unwound and get them sliding around on you. The worst case is you'll see someone, and I've done it myself, where you come off of here, you get too happy on the throttle, the back end comes around and you wind up over on the grass on the right side or even into the wall. So that's the biggest danger here. But otherwise, the corner itself is pretty straightforward. Um, the one thing that I'll point out from a stylistic thing that I don't know that you necessarily want to copy on this is you can see how far I am from the left side of the track on my exit. That's pretty common for me, and I'd say that's certainly to a certain extent that's a stylistic thing where I really am trying to get the car turned as quickly as I can, and so a lot of the times I don't get as wide on the exits of hairpins as a lot of people do. Um, a lot of the very, very quick drivers, and you'll see them in our community as well, when they do this exit, they'll get right out there on the edge, and I'd say that's much more common as far as approach goes. So when you see me coming up off of the left line here, don't necessarily think that that's something to copy, because I wouldn't call it the norm. Okay. Uh, the to do. Okay, this is another tricky turn, and one of the first mistakes that I see people make here is that once again this is a little bit different. So I'll see a lot of people get far enough over to the right side of the track to open this up, but what I see is people get over there too late. Okay, so when they come out of Druids here, and on the exit the car drifts out to the left side, they won't make any significant attempt to get back over to the right side of the track. I think that's a mistake. I think you want to get the car back over to the right side as quickly as possible. And the reason that I think you want to do that is because of the balance of the car. So you'll see me get back over there quickly so that I'm able to trace the right side of the track as I come up to my entry. A lot of people will still be in the middle of the track at this point. And what that means is that they are going to have a much greater tendency to upset the balance of the car when they enter the braking zone and the turning zone at the entry to this corner, right? Because when by being over here to the right side of the track, you can see that I'm already beginning my left-hand turn and loading up the car, right? So some of that weight is already transferring out there. And then when I hit the braking zone, which is right here before the red and white striping occurs, okay? When I hit the braking zone, all I have to do is just hold that steering angle, right? Um, so I'll hit the brakes. You'll see me even straighten up just a slight bit, right? But I'll hold that steering angle, and the weight is already secured in a balanced position. If you're working your way out from the middle of the track at this point, what I think you have to do, or at least what the tendency to have to do, is you're going to have to turn the wheel much more either at this point or immediately before it, which means the weight shifting to the outside and onto the nose, so the front right tire, is much more significant than what happens when you start out from the right side like I do when you approach the braking zone. So I think particularly if this is a corner that you struggle in, then take a look at your line and see if you're coming from the middle of the track. Try getting over to the right side more quickly and see if that helps you maintain a better balanced car at this critical entry phase to this left-hander. Let's see. The other thing I want you to notice is how far to the right I get in order to open this up. I really am trying to get right along the edge of the red and white stripe curb for the entry. And this is one of those corners that I was talking about where Brands Hatch is a battle between your courage and your brains, you know, and walking that fine line between maximizing your lap time and putting your wheels off into the grass and destroying your race. So that's a judgment call that you'll have to make, and it'll depend on your experience and comfort level at this track. But I want to be as wide as humanly possible when I come into this without putting tires off onto the right hand side. Okay, so my target is to put my left wheels right on the red and white striping of this curb. I think I catch this one a little bit too heavy and go just over the edge. Yeah, it's just a little bit too heavy. You can see just like half the tires are kind of out there over the edge. You know, I'd much rather be 6 inches to a foot further to the right and just catching the edge of this. But if I've done my job right and I have broke properly and turned properly so that I have maintained a balanced car, then when I hit this apex, I should be able to start going back on full throttle. If you find that you can't start doing that, you know, until all the way out here on the exit somewhere, and it was that catching that curb too heavy is what forced me to wait. But if you find that you really have to delay, then come back and look at how you are entering and how you are braking for this corner, because something you're doing here is upsetting the balance of the car to the point where it is not flat enough for you to get back on the throttle at or just after the apex. You'll see the car bounce here, which is what delays me. Boom. You've got to wait. You've got to wait. It's got to settle, you know. But Once you do get back on the throttle, use all of this curb that you can. You know, you have a ton of room out here before you run into track violations. Okay, so it's going to bounce, but watch the balance of the car shift, and you shouldn't see any severe changes in the orientation of the car, with the exception of when it's actually bouncing because of the too hard of a curb strike. But what you don't see is you don't see any heavy pitches forward or back or from side to side, and that's what I'm after. Okay, Surtees is, I think, one of the hardest corners on any track anywhere to get right and to get right consistently. I really do believe that. It's probably the up there in the top three of corners that I have a hard time maximizing every time that I come through it. So let's talk about some of the options and the challenges that you face here. My braking point is the orange marker on the right-hand side, just past the 50-meter board. Okay. Now the 50-meter board is probably going to get taken out at some point, so I would suggest that you use the orange markers rather than the brake markers themselves. You'll find that comes in handy mid-race when that disappears. I want to be as far to the outside of the right-hand track as possible at this point, but where I'm actually going to be heading is to the center of the track because of the weird shape of this corner. It starts to change elevations right here. It's off camber. It's bumpy. It has a curb that will upset the car on the inside, and it has a curb on the outside on the exit that if you hit it too tough will put you into a wall if you're not careful. So just past there, I go onto the brakes, and you can see that my nose is already pointing into the middle of the track. Okay, this is another one where I have already preset the weight to a certain extent to the outside tires so that it's not all happening at the same time, right? And when I go onto the brakes, right up the middle of the track, all I'm going to do is just hold that steering angle while I go under braking. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it for quite a long time, right? Um, it's super easy to start turning into this corner either too early or too late, and that's why it's such a difficult corner both to handle and to do consistently. You'll see that I start trail braking, and my trail braking ends long before I hit the, I don't know what you want to call it, the real apex of the corner, if you will, which is where I get closest to the curb. The I almost think that there ought to be terms for this. If there are, I've never seen them, but what I guess the way I would put it is there are two different kinds of apexes in my mind. One I'll call it the driver input apex, and two is the curb apex, right? The driver input apex is really where your lowest speed occurs in the corner, okay? Whereas the curb apex is the point of the corner where you come closest to the inside of the corner itself, right? A lot of the times those are the same thing. So like at the hairpin, hairpins are notorious for that, Both the driver input apex and the curb apex are generally the same thing or extremely close to being the same thing. A lot of corners, though, that is simply not the case. And usually the faster a corner is, the more separation there is between the curb apex and the driver input apex, right? This is a good example of that, where long before I hit the curb apex, I have already hit the apex of where my inputs transition from slowing to speeding up. Okay, if that makes any sense. So the curb apex comes very late. The driver input apex comes very early. Because all I'm trying to do is when I hit my brake marker, I want to have the car pointed to the middle of the track so that I can straight line brake without really changing my steering inputs anymore at this point, right? Slow the car enough that I'm going to be able to turn in. I start that turn in, start coming off the brakes. I hit the end of my trail braking point, which is where my lowest speed will be. And then I start using the throttle to maintain speed during the curb apex, right? Before I can actually get fully back on the throttle. Still can't go full throttle. Still can't. I have to wait. I have to wait. I have to wait because I haven't cleared the curb, right? Now I'm getting to a point where the car can actually straighten up, and that's when I'm able to go back to full throttle. So I hope that makes some kind of sense. I think that I don't want to call this a mistake because I'm not sure that it is a mistake. So I'm going to call this an alternate approach that I have never really understood personally, okay? Because I do see a lot of people who will take a much wider line here and a wider entry. I have never been able to make that work. I've tried it, and it just doesn't work for me at all. So there are a lot of people who will straight line brake much more on the right side of the track with a much later turn in. To me, I think that that induces too much understeer, gets entirely too difficult to get the car turned, overslows the car, and I just feel like I have to wait forever to get through this corner. So that's why my approach is much more center of the track here rather than staying to the right hand side. Whereas most of the time you'll see me, I want to stay as far to the right as I can when I'm entering a corner. This corner is unusual in that. The shape of it just doesn't make sense to me to do that. I think you're much better off aiming for the middle of the track in your braking zone here. But if you can stay to the right somehow and make that work for you, by all means do it. But I've never been able to do it. What I will say is that if you're taking that wider approach and you find yourself really fighting some understeer, and having trouble getting the car turned, then take a look at this approach that I'm using and get the car pointed more to the center of the track early and see if that helps you get around that tricky part of the corner. Watch yourself, obviously, on the exit here. If you do... So onto your exit, it's really easy to get too far over to the right side. You can absolutely run up on this red and white striped curb. I didn't this time, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But the danger isn't so much to your right. It's directly in front of you more than anything else. Right where that red and white striped curb ends, or at least narrows down to the little bitty strip of it right there in front of my car. Huge bump coming off of that curb, right? It will absolutely upset the car, and your best case scenario is you're going to lose a ton of time. Your worst case scenario is it actually bounces the car around and puts you into a wall. So be very cautious about how much of that curb you take, and especially be cautious about remaining on the curb too long so that you are running off of the end of it and into the grass. That's the part that you really want to avoid. Okay, now we get into the fast stuff. And Hawthorne's is pretty straightforward, I think, as far as how you go about taking it. I don't think there's a lot of dispute about how you do it. It's just, it's pretty straightforward. It doesn't have a lot of secrets to it. You just stay as far to the left as you can, catch the apex as close as you can, get back on the gas as quickly as you can, and run the car as wide as you can without going into the grass. There's not a lot about it that's complicated. For me, braking marker is the orange marker on the right-hand side, and I'll get onto the brakes just as I go past it. I do not want to go too hard on the brakes here, though. This is a fast corner, so one, you don't want to bleed any speed, if any more speed than you have to. Two, I don't want the nose to dive down so far that the balance of the car is going to be upset when I make my turn in, right? So although this is one of those where, although it's showing 100% on the brake trace, this is a much more gentle application by me, because I'm just trying to get the nose turned in and slow just enough so that I can make the corner without understeering badly, right? But otherwise, be gentle on the brakes here. Don't overdo it, or you can put yourself in a bad spot. And what you should see is, you shouldn't see significant changes in the balance of the car at this point, right? Because all you're doing is you've got it moved over to where it needs to be, and you're just holding on, waiting for the car to rotate so that you can get fully back on the gas and exit it. So I think, watch that and see how smooth that weight transition looks. When you hear people talk about smooth driving, the whole goal of smooth driving really is to maintain a well-balanced car, so that you can maximize grip levels of the tires, and that's all that is trying to do right there. It's a straightforward turn. There's not much to it. I think the last thing I'll say is what gear you use. I think that's a tricky one, and it really varies a lot on that corner from car to car. Um, some cars I think are pretty obvious depending on how they're geared. Like the Porsche, I think is almost always going to take that in fourth gear. They're never going to drop down to third for that. Whereas something like the McLaren, that is geared completely differently, is probably better off because the gears are so tall on that. Third gear is probably better off. The Lambo, I think, is actually really in the middle there. Right now, I'm taking it in fourth gear, and I think that's a little bit quicker. But there are plenty of times when I have taken this in third gear, and it's close. So I think you just have to do some experimenting in your car to see whether it's better to take that corner in third or fourth gear. Okay, Westfield and these These next two corners, Westfield and Sheen, are fairly similar. At least the approaches to them are fairly similar. My braking point is the orange marker on the right hand side. I want to be getting on the brakes essentially as I'm coming alongside of it or just past it. This is another one you where you want to be as far to the left as possible, and it's easy to find yourself in the middle of the road and closing this corner down too soon. Because here's the reality of these next two corners. If you want to be able to make decent lap times on this track, you must cut these next two corners significantly. Okay? Watch how far I get over these two apexes. Both tires inside the white line. You know, that's you just have to be either that aggressive or very close to that aggressive. But there's no question your right tires need to be over the red and white striped curb in order to make time on this track. And the next corner is no different. The reason is fairly simple because you want to straighten this corner as much as possible. You want to be able to be getting back onto the throttle as quick as possible. And if you are incorrectly narrowing this corner by either making your approach too far to the inside or not cutting this corner enough, then you are going to have to delay getting back onto the gas. And on fast corners like this, that absolutely robs you of time. You know, there's just no way around it. So my advice to you is that if you're particularly new at this track, you know, start it out relatively easy in that you know, get your right tires at least onto the red and white striped curb, then try to get them just off of it, then try to get to a point where you can take it even more, you know, and work up to it so that you can get a feel for how these two corners work, because the car is going to bounce around a lot on you, and you've got to learn to get comfortable with that, and that your car is going to be able to handle it. The other thing that I want you to see is how soon I'm off the brakes. This is another one where I'm just massaging the brake enough to get the car slowed a little bit and to get grip on the front wheels so that I can make, you know, a sharp turn in here, right? But once I've got that accomplished, I'm coming off of the brakes and getting back onto the throttle even before I actually hit the physical apex itself. I may not be able to go onto the throttle until I'm past it, but at least I'm no longer losing speed, right? When you get back on the throttle will depend entirely on how well your car recovers from those bumps. You know, some cars will be better at it than others and get back to being more stable more quickly. See how far you can come out here on the left-hand side? That those are, I don't know what the actual term of those are, but there is mesh under grass here on the left-hand side that you can just barely make out outside of the red and white striped curbs. You can absolutely come out and use that on exit without spinning out. It's not until you either get even farther left into the grass or further up a road where you can see the mesh actually ending. Once you get past that mesh up here, that's when your tires are going to lose all of their grip on the ground. But you can come out here very wide and hold a good long time on full throttle before you absolutely have to get back onto the track. You'll be perfectly fine out here. Okay. The basic approach to sheen is very similar. The big difference is that this one is blind, right? You simply don't pick up the apex until very late in the corner. Um, so there's a certain level of practice that you're going to have to do in order to get this one right. Um, but having said that, the approach is very much the same. The orange marker, again, on the right-hand side is my braking reference. Just as I get past it, once again, I'll get on the brakes, again, massaging the brakes, not slamming them, so that I can get the car slowed, get the front end pointed in the right direction without overly disrupting the balance of the car, right? Get as far out to the left as I can. See how far I get out. Not bad. It's this is a hard one to really get out there on, in my opinion, because you're kind of running. The track kind of runs away from you a little bit, and it's easy to get out there too far and put your wheels on it. So I think it probably you have less margin for error on your entry to this corner than you do on the previous one. This one's just easier to screw up, in my opinion. But the approach is the same. Get out there as far as you can, massage the brakes, come off of them early as soon as you can get the car turned, and start getting back on the throttle with a heavy cut of the track. Again, left tire is all the way inside of the white stripe line. And I think this exit has some netting as well, but it's not nearly as safe. Yeah. It's got it there, but the problem is it runs out by the time it really does you any good. So right around here is where you would start really your wheels out there on it, and it's already running out. So while it has that mesh netting out there, it's not at a place where it does you a lot of good, you know. So keep your wheels off the grass on this exit entirely. Okay, Sterling's. I think this is I think this is another one where you're well served to get back over to the right as quickly as you can to get your car lined up better before you enter the braking. There's not a lot of room, you know, so you may not be able to get it back over there and straightened up completely, but I don't think you want to be coming into this at too sharp of an angle, or at least no more sharply than you absolutely have to. So, um, try to get back over here to the right as quickly as you can. You'll see right there, I've started nudging the steering to the left already. That's presetting the weight out there on the right-hand side. And then right as I approach this orange marker on the right-hand side, that's when I go into braking. This one is a relatively heavy braking zone. It's a little bit downhill, so you're not going to get away with too gentle of an application here. I take it in second gear, and I'll trail brake relatively heavily into it. You know, it lasts a good long time. See, this is an example of where the input, the driver input apex is a very close match to the curb apex or the physical apex. Very much the same thing. Get your right tires onto the red and white striped curbing and get back onto the throttle as soon as you're coming over it, pretty much, you know. If you've got the car turned properly, you won't have any problem with making this exit. You certainly can get out on the red and white striping here. You just don't want to get so far that your tires stay out there once that red and white stripe curbing ends, because that's when you're going to hit yet another big bump as you go down into the grass. You're going to lose traction, and it's going to start costing you a lot of time. So you can use it, but try to get back inside as that curbing is ending so that you're avoiding that drop into the grass right after it. Okay, last corner. Okay, this is, in a lot of ways, this corner is very similar to turn one, where you have an elevation change and essentially a peak that's right there at the apex of the corner, you know. So you don't want to be, you don't want to still be unloading the back end as you hit that apex and the peak of that little rise, you know, because it cuts off downhill at that point. And if you unload the tires too much, that's where you're going to get the back end sliding around a lot on you. My braking marker is, you can use the 50 yard marker, but it's not going to last very long. So I use the end of the wall and the orange marker on the left hand side. I'll use that as my braking reference. I think you have to be careful about turning in too early here, because it's easy to catch too much of this curb, which I actually do on this one. In a perfect world, I would just be brushing the red and white striped curbing, but I catch it a bit heavy there. But as you can see, my braking inputs and are all completely done at this point, and I'm just maintaining the balance of the car as I come up over this rise. If you're doing that, it won't kill you to catch this curve. It may cost you a little bit of time, but it's not going to upset the balance of the car too much. And as soon as you get clear, you're able to come back onto it. I think picking up heavy understeer is a common problem here, and that is usually because someone is either trying to brake too late, so they're just entering the corner entirely too fast, and you just don't have enough grip on the front tires, or you're turning in too sharply, and your speed might be fine, but your steering angle, you know, is overdone, and therefore you're exceeding the grip of the front tires in the same way that you would as if you came in too fast. So I think those are probably the two most common problems here. And beyond that, it would be getting back on the throttle too soon, where when the weight is coming off as you go over that rise, and losing the back end. That's another one that you'll see where someone just starts fishtailing around the exit of this corner, and that is usually because they have overdone their steering angle and gotten back onto the throttle too soon. So there's not enough grip there, and everything just starts sliding out from under you. I really love the helmet cam for this purpose, where you can really see the gradual transition, of the weight shift and how your inputs affect that weight shift. Too hard on the brakes or too hard on your steering, that kind of thing. You'll start seeing abrupt shifts in the weight, and that's a good indication that there's something there that you need to smooth out. Okay, so anyway, that is a lap at Brands Hatch. Let's back up and do the overhead views and full speed from the cockpit. And I'll take it off of, we'll do standard steering wheel view for this lap at full speed. What was that? That was a good lap, 124.297. That's a good lap. Let's do the overhead now. So you can see the lines. And there we go. Hope that helps, guys. Enjoy your prep for this week, and good luck this weekend. If you're racing with me, I will see you on the track on Sunday. Otherwise, probably in the practice server over the next few days if you're working on Brands Hatch. So thanks a lot, guys. Take care. Have a good night, and we'll see you later.